Welcome to Chips and Salsa. I'm Jerry.
Black Hat CRob.
And again, yes, I am still here with Black Hat. And joining us here are Dustin and Brian from Trend Micro's Zero Day Initiative. And you guys are down here to give an interesting talk. What is the title of your talk?
Oh, you put us on the spot. I don't remember.
Why do you think I asked you?
I'm like, calculating risk in the era of advisory obscurity. I don't even remember the name of the talk, man. We've been working on it for so long. It's the title is how enterprises can figure out risk in an era where security updates are of intermittent quality. I'll say that.
And based on I think your abstract said 17 years of
right
reporting vulnerabilities. I know that Zero Day Initiative goes way back to the early days of paying for bugs.
And, since 2005, we've had over 10,000 vulnerability disclosures in the lifetime of the program. So we really have a unique view of like the entire life cycle of a bug, from acquiring it to working with the vendor to reporting it, the whole disclosure process, and then seeing it get patched and then go out to customers, whether it be our customers or somebody else's customers. We're seeing a full life cycle of a single vulnerability. Times 10,000.
Yeah, and it's also interesting too because we work in different verticals of software, and so we get to see not only just how like Microsoft and the bigger vendors actually handle it, but ICS vendors, mobile vendors. So we get to see a widespread of vulnerabilities and how they're actually fixed.
So, what are some of the key takeaways from your talk?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that enterprises are really losing their ability to estimate risk from security patches based on a declining quality of security patches and an increasing obscurity of the communication surrounding the patch themselves. We've seen over the years, just the patches are getting worse, and their patches have always had problems. I mean, you and I both know this. But over the last few years, there's definitely been a decline in quality that's having a real impact on enterprises. And we're seeing patches again and again increase risk rather than decrease risk as they come out. Because essentially what you're doing is you're telling all of the bad guys, here's a patch. Bugs are hard to find, right? Unless it's the second Tuesday of the month, like today, and Microsoft goes, here's 121 of them. And the bad guys can use that. But the enterprises don't have the tools to actually protect themselves because the patches have lost the quality. And the communications is to the point where it's like, we don't know exactly what this bug is, so we can't make a good risk assessment on the threat from this.
So, what has been lost in the quality specifically?
Well, we're seeing more and more failed patches. There are a lot of instances where a bug will get patched, and we'll hear from the researcher within an hour saying, "Hey, I bypassed the patch." So this is. And I know not every patch gets exploited, but this is costing real money because we're buying the bugs multiple times. We're essentially buying the same bug 3 and 4 times. And then enterprises are spending their resources 3 or 4 times rolling out what should have been one patch. So if it takes 4 times to roll out a patch to really address a bug, enterprises are spending 4 times their resources. And whatever your calculus is for the dollar amount to apply a patch, anything times 4 is more than times 1. I'm not good at math, but I remembered that.
Well, according to CRob, I'm not good at computers. So.
Okay.
Did you have any theories about why the patch quality might be lower today than it was in days of yore when you started out?
Yeah, there's a lot of different reasons. And I think one of the biggest reasons is a move away from sustained engineering and towards product development. So companies just aren't investing in post-release activities. They're seeing, once they've gone to market, it's the cow's out of the barn. You can't do anything now. It's like, well, no, you still have to take care of the cow and feed the cow and everything else. So there's not as much investment into support and actually maintaining a product once it's live. We've also seen a decrease in investment in testing and QA. Like Satya Nadella, one of the first things he did as CEO of Microsoft, he took out most of the testing organization and said developers can go ahead and do their own testing rather than having a separate testing org do that. And a lot of other businesses have followed that lead, at least to the point where they're letting developers do more and more of their testing themselves rather than having a separate QA organization.
I also think there's a little bit of a skill gap too there, like
Yeah.
whether it relates to actually understanding what the bugs actually are and how you actually go about fixing them. So there's a combination of things that are really causing this to happen.
Yeah, the level of complexity with software these days has really ratcheted up in the last decade. So finding those people who really understand what we're talking about when we talk about bugs, and then what's needed to comprehensively fix the bug, it's those people tend to be few
It's a
and far
rare skill
between,
set.
and they tend to be pricey.
Yeah, this sounds like a kind of an unintended consequence of DevSecOpsing everything.
I didn't want to put it too much on the DevOps community, because there's a lot of good things in that too. But I think in some ways you could absolutely say it was an unintended consequence of trying to get everything combined into a single person.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, do you guys have, like, and you don't have to share them here, but in your presentation, like numbers of like bad patches?
Well, it's only a 40-minute presentation. We actually had to trim out a bunch of examples because there were just too many. But yeah, so what we're seeing is roughly anywhere between 10 and 20% of the patches we're dealing with today are the result of like incomplete or faulty patches.
And those are just the ones going through ZDI?
No, those are across the industry that we're seeing.
Yeah.
But it's not just us seeing this. Google Project Zero came out and said, most of the zero dates that they're seeing in the field are based on incomplete patches.
Yeah, or variant bugs.
Or variant bugs or something. So yeah, we have a lot of examples that we're talking about across multiple vendors, including an example for Trend Micro too, because we're not there to just throw stones in a glass house. But yeah, there's way too many examples that we could use.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I guess that would also potentially impact enterprises' willingness to, uptake patches without some sort of validation work beforehand. And
right. I mean, we've always said you need to test and deploy rather than just deploy, but we also see that that's not really happening a lot. There are some very mature enterprises out there who are rolling out updates very quickly, but then there's a lot who aren't. And we see this year after year with big bugs that get a lot of attention, and yet somehow 6 months later, there's still hundreds of thousands of publicly accessible systems that are still exploitable, just because they haven't applied the patch. So there's already a lot of people who do not trust security patches, and we're not getting any better at that. So enterprises have to be able to deal with that. They're spending a lot of money on third-party tools, not only for patch management now, but for patch prioritization, because their resources are so limited. We're all the three unders, understaffed, underfunded, under pressure. So they have to be very wise with how they spend their money. And yeah, it's definitely a problem. There's some who roll it out real quick, and then there's some that's, especially in the healthcare industry, we see it just like 6 months later, it's like, you still haven't applied that patch.
Do you think that's a complexity problem, that systems are more complex and potentially things are obfuscated? Or is it staffing? As you mentioned, we're understaffed, under-resourced.
Right.
Vulnerability management's been a discipline for 20 years. Hopefully people are better at it.
You would think, but if people were that good at it, would third-party patch management solutions be making that much money? Part of it is a staffing problem, in they don't understand how to automate their patches, or they don't trust the patch automation. And then there's also one of the things that we say is you have to be ruthless in your asset discovery, whether it's network fingerprinting or asset discovery. You can't protect what you don't know you have, so you have to be really ruthless in finding out what you have. And then once you find it, you have to know how to segment it, so that if there's an issue with one thing, you can just turn that segment off until you can get something tested and deployed out there. But there are a lot of folks who just don't think along those lines, especially the small to medium-sized enterprises where those resources aren't there and that experience isn't there. A lot of times it's somebody junior in their career, they just don't know.
And I think we see too, like, different software vendors are taking different approaches to patching, which could cause confusion, right? You have the traditional kind of Patch Tuesday release on a schedule, and then there's people that are doing, automatic updates. And how does that work in various pieces of software? And which path are they going to take? Is it over the air style updates, regional updates? All of this stuff complicates the matter.
Yeah,
makes it more challenging for people.
Oh, so I guess that leads to the final question I have, which is, what are you hoping folks to take away from your talk?
Well, the biggest key takeaways are what enterprises can do and what actions that they can take to hopefully better understand the risk and protect themselves. But what we really looked at, I mean, the real takeaway is we as ZDI looked at how we as disclosure wholesalers could incentivize vendors to be better. And the biggest tool we have in our toolbox for that is our disclosure timeline. So we have normally a 120-day disclosure timeline, but moving forward, we're going to have a tiered timeline for bugs that we believe result from failed or incomplete patches. So for critical bugs where active attack is either happening or imminent, the disclosure timeline is going to be 30 days. For critical and high severity bugs where the patch provides some protections, it'll be 60 days, and then for everything else, it'll be 90 days. So we're reducing those timelines because if you've already had 120 days to fix a bug and then within an hour we bypass it, you really shouldn't get another 120 days because that's 120 days of exposure that you're just leaving the customers out there with and the enterprises. So we're going to shorten that exposure window as much as we can.
That's very interesting and kind of a new spin on disclosure timelines. I'm not sure I don't like it. It's not making me mad.
Okay, well that's good.
Because that's actually a novel idea, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the industry responds to it, and because we are buying a lot more failed patches now. Like it also gives us an opportunity to understand like what's actually happening there and how they're fixing bugs. We have a team that is staffed just to look at security patches. So it gives us just an interesting opportunity to interact with the vendor and also apply a little bit of pressure to make sure that things are getting better in the future.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to see if how that gets taken up across the industry.
I think different sectors will handle it better than others. We definitely see certain verticals struggle much more with timelines than others. That the Microsofts, the Apples, the Adobes, the Ciscos, they're pretty mature in their response processes. But the ICS vendors, a lot of times, the smaller vendors definitely still struggle to really be resourced to handle any response at all.
Yeah, and then for like us, CRob and I manage the Intel platform update process, or the communications part of it, which is a phased rollout because we have a whole ecosystem of companies that we deal with. We provide a microcode patch in a beta phase. They have to test and validate against their product sets, and then we get to a production validated piece of code that then has to be integrated with thousands and thousands of product in order to get to that public disclosure that we've all coordinated on, which is a little different than the software part side of the world. But I think disclosure timelines are important, and this whole concept of failed patches is I haven't heard much about that before, so this seems very interesting to me.
It's really kind of astonishing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, hopefully you guys are able to influence behaviors to encourage people that are doing a great job and then kind of kick some people along that need kicking if they aren't.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely our hope. Yeah, that's definitely our hope with the change.
And especially if we find vendors, we've talked about not necessarily a magic quadrant for good vendors, but how do we recognize the vendors who really are doing a good job producing comprehensive patches in a reasonable timeline? So we're still trying to figure out how best we can recognize them too.
Well, that's awesome. Well, good luck with the talk
Thanks.
and the topic. I think that's an interesting take on an industry that's evolved a little bit, but I haven't seen too much evolution in the last few years as far as disclosure timelines. This is a very interesting approach, I think. So thanks for coming and talking to us about it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Well, I guess, CRob, that's it for this episode of Chips and Salsa. We'll see
another black hat talk in the bag, Jerry. Doing great.
I think we've had more black hat talks than anybody.
I tell you. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you guys coming and talking.
All right. Thanks, CRob. Nice meeting you.